What should you be considering if you are thinking about traveling and re-entering the United States as a permanent resident or as a green card holder? That is what we're talking about on today's Live at Lunch. My name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law, and this is a question that we're getting all the time. It's totally understandable because there are some news stories out there, lots of information out there about travel and about people having problems re-entering the United States, even as a green card holder. Also, of course, for individuals who hold a temporary or non-immigrant visa classification, and sometimes U.S. citizens. I heard of a story yesterday where a U.S. citizen lawyer's phone was searched. So it is not without risk for anyone to leave the United States and re-enter. The information that we're talking about today is not legal advice. If you plan to travel and re-enter the United States, regardless of your immigration status, unless you're a US citizen, and even then, think through, perhaps get legal advice before you travel. But if you are a foreign national, if you're not a US citizen already, make sure that you talk to a qualified immigration attorney before you travel, because there are a lot of things happening at the border today. Or these days, not today in particular, but these right now in current times. So if you have questions as we go through some of these considerations and tips, again, this is not legal advice, put them in the comments and I'm happy to respond as and when I can. Like I said, I can't give legal advice. So if it's a very fact specific question, I may ask you to contact us directly and or set up a consultation if you're not yet a client. So I have some notes because there's a lot to cover here, but know that if you are re-entering the United States as a permanent resident or as a green card holder, that you do have rights when you re-enter, certain rights when you re-enter the United States. So first thing to keep in mind is when you re-enter the United States, if the officer asks you questions, and you may re-enter the United States and not have any problems at all. They may say, welcome back, welcome home. But if they ask you questions, the first thing to keep in mind is to tell the truth. The worst thing that you can do is to lie. So you definitely want to tell the truth. What happens if you are questioned? There's a couple different scenarios if you have problems when you re-enter the United States. One is that CBP could ask you questions while you are at the desk that everybody, the line that everybody goes through. It could be unpleasant in the moment, but ultimately you get in. Another possibility is that CBP could put you in what's called secondary inspection. That is a separate area where they take individuals that they feel like they need to question more in depth. If you go to secondary inspection, it's probably not going to be a pleasant experience, just putting that out there. You could be there for anywhere from a few minutes to several hours or potentially longer. It's not fun. You may be sitting, by yourself. They may ask you questions and then go talk to some other officers or check a computer. They may not ask you a lot of questions. They may just say, hey, you need to wait here. They may ask you a lot of questions. It really depends. It varies depending on the particular situation. So like I said, you could be there several hours or longer. They will ask you questions. They may collect biometrics like fingerprinting. They may run record checks. And they may try to determine whether you should be, that's their purpose, is to try to determine whether you should be readmitted to the United States. So if you are detained, you do have some rights, like I said. The challenge is that you're stressed in the moment, right? And you may or may not remember this in the moment. And CBP they can be really intimidating, and they can tell you, oh, you actually don't have the right to do these things that I'm about to tell you. So keep in mind that you do have the right, advocate for yourself as much as possible, but you of course don't want to get belligerent. So you have the right to contact your consulate, your country's consulate, for assistance if you have trouble re-entering the United States. Again, you may not be able to logistically do that while you're actually, in the moment. They may not allow you to make phone calls. They may not allow you to contact people, but you can contact your consulate for assistance. Of course, you can also contact an immigration lawyer. Hopefully you have an immigration lawyer that you have worked with before. Hopefully you are letting them know, ideally, that you are traveling so that your lawyer has a heads up and is ready. You can ask CBP for permission to contact your lawyer. but they may tell you that you do not have the right to speak to an attorney. I've had clients in secondary inspection who were not able to contact me, at least immediately. You do have a right to review any and all written statements that are prepared for you in a language that you can understand. So if English is not your first language, you have the right to read it and review it in a language that you understand. If you do not agree with the information in the written statements that are presented to you, you can refuse to sign them. You do not have a right of privacy, unfortunately, especially when it comes to your electronics. So laptops, any iPads, things like that, iPads, phones, things like that, you do not necessarily have a right to privacy. There is a separate advisory from the ACLU, just information, thoughts, considerations. It's not legal advice, but I'll try to remember to post that, and I've referenced it before, but I'll try to remember to post the link, make a comment if you want it, and I'll certainly provide it. But that those guidelines from the ACLU, I think, are good guidelines in terms of what to expect. You may want to travel as light as you can, meaning not travel with electronic devices that could be searched, but know that as a permanent resident, you don't have the right to privacy in terms of your devices, your laptops, your iPods, not pods, those are from 2008. Anyway, your electronic devices, you unfortunately don't have a right to privacy there. Another consideration, especially in terms of permanent residence, if US or if CBP determines that you are if you've been outside of the United States for more than 6 months, they can look at whether you are admissible to the United States. So they may look at how long you've been outside of the United States. They may ask you why you were outside of the United States for that long. They may try to make you think that you have abandoned your permanent residence by being outside of the United States for a long, over 6 months, basically. They could ask about any potential illegal activity that you've engaged in while you're outside of the United States. It could be that they would ask about previous public charge issues. In other words, all the admissibility issues, the reasons that a person would not be or shouldn't be eligible to be admitted to the United States, they can ask questions, probing questions, trying to get at that, whether there's something there or not. So it can be really unpleasant. So know if you are outside of the United States for more than 180 days, more than 6 months, that you could be subjected to that type of questioning. If you are a green card holder and you know that you're going to be outside of the United States for more than a year, you can file for what's called a reentry permit. You have to file for the reentry permit while you're physically present in the United States. And that doesn't mean, if you have a reentry permit, even if it's approved, that does not mean you're not going to be questioned when you re-enter the United States. It means that you have applied to stay outside of the United States for longer than a year. So I mentioned 6 months a minute ago, and I said you could be asked admissibility questions if you're outside of the US for more than 6 months. If you're outside of the US for longer than a year, you have essentially abandoned your permanent residence. So if you are coming up on the 1 year mark, I would talk to an immigration lawyer, but I would try to get back to the United States before then. But again, if you know ahead of time, I've had lots of clients over the years who need to be outside of the United States, and they know ahead of time for any number of reasons, like for education, for work purposes, for any number of reasons. They have applied for a reentry permit, and that preserves their permanent residence. So in other words, they're able to reenter after an extended period abroad, even though they hold a green card and they've been outside for a longer time. So it is possible, going back to what could happen at the port of entry or what could happen with CBP, if the officer if they think that you have abandoned your permanent residence, they could ask you to sign what's called the Form I-407. That is a form to relinquish your permanent residence. You do not have to sign that. You should not be pressured into signing the I-407 to abandon your permanent residence. It has to be signed voluntarily, so you can't be forced into signing it. And if the officer at the port of entry believes you've abandoned your permanent residence, for example, by staying outside of the United States for too long, instead of you signing against your will the Form I-407, the officer would then initiate what's basically removal proceedings. They would initiate a notice to appear in immigration court before an immigration judge, and then you would have a chance, ideally with an immigration lawyer, hopefully, to explain the situation and defend yourself in court rather than just surrendering, signing that form, the I-407, to surrender your permanent residence at the port of entry. If CBP takes your permanent residence card, that can happen. You have the right to other evidence of your status, such as a stamp in your passport. And then just in general, when you're traveling, like I said, first thing that I said was number one rule is to tell the truth. The other thing is, like I said before previously, if you are presented with a statement, review it, make sure that you understand it, and don't sign it if you don't agree with it. And then also, it's really, really helpful to have this after the fact. So I said a few minutes ago, they may not allow you to contact your immigration lawyer or an immigration lawyer. If that happens, if you're not able to, it's so helpful to have a transcript. So if the interaction is recorded, get a transcript so that you can give that to the immigration lawyer, because that really helps us as immigration lawyers determine exactly what happened at the port of entry. You may not remember everything. I know it's a stressful situation and your memory is kind of not the top thing working at the moment because you're so stressed. So that can be really helpful to get a transcript of exactly what happened. In addition, whether you have the written transcript or not, as soon as you can, after all of this has happened, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, write everything down that you remember, including the name of the officer's number, any questions that they asked, any answers that you gave, any documentation they asked for. Write down, if you gave any documentation, write that down. Write it down, because even though it seems like, oh my gosh, that was so traumatic, I'm going to remember that forever. You may remember elements of it, but you're not going to remember every detail. So write it down, and that can be really helpful, again, when you talk to an immigration lawyer after the fact. So there's always a question of, should I travel as a permanent resident? And I can't answer that question, but I am telling people, because it depends, right? If you're our client, we can have a conversation about it. I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations about that. But if you are, in general, if you're a permanent resident, I have clients right now who are naturalizing. They're applying to become US citizens so that they can travel with, hopefully, without having to worry about this type of thing. So my point is, A, that even permanent residents are not safe. It's not risk-free to travel. And B, the way to address that is potentially, hopefully, is to become a US citizen. So that is, not everybody can or wants to become a US citizen, and I totally respect that. But we have so many clients right now who are naturalizing because of the recent incidents, and they want to minimize their chance of having a problem at the port of entry. So they're applying to become naturalized US citizens. So I hope that you have found this information helpful. I'm so sorry that this is happening and that there aren't clear answers right now, but we are here to support you. If you found this information helpful, I hope that you will share this video with a friend or colleague. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel that you are on which you're watching this video, whether that's LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, and so that you don't miss our next video. And otherwise, my name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law, helping clients around the United States and around the world with family-based and employment-based immigration matters. We look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at noon Eastern for Live at Lunch. Until then.